Welcome to Sell Ready Podcast. Today's guest is Eric Gaul, the founder of Edison's Business Advisors. Eric, he spent decades in the M&A world as an entrepreneur, as an investor, as a business broker, and an advisor. After building and selling a business of his own, he's launched his own boutique private equity group before founding Edison's Business Advisors in 2014. Eric, very excited to have you here.
Great. Thank you, Alyssa. Glad to be here.
Tell me a little bit more about what you guys work on at Edison's MBA.
Yeah, there's a lot of brokers out there that specialize in specific segments. I have a team of 9 additional intermediaries that work with me, 4 are more senior and experienced, and I've got 4 kind of young, up and coming, intermediaries as well. We're pretty agnostic because we really rely on the knowledge and experience of, the staff that we have on board. So, for example, my background is in manufacturing. I've got a lot of family in medical and friends in medical and dental. So those are areas where I tend to gravitate. We've got Mike, one of our key people. He's got experience in veterinary practices. He's owned a men's retail shop. He's a CPA who, had some specific niches that he serviced, as a CPA. So, he's got his kind of little niches. Steve, another one of my senior guys, Keith, another one of my senior guys, Ian. They all have kind of niches where they've owned and operated in the past, those types of businesses. So, we can bring a pretty diverse group of people and not have to specialize in any one niche, to help business owners prepare and sell their businesses.
Okay, cool. Talk to me a bit more about that, right? You guys are a bit agnostic, but I always like to say, like, business is business is business. Right? But what are the biggest issues that you guys see that are actually killing the deals before you actually make it to the closing tables?
Well, it's kind of an odd world right now because I would say in the last 5 years, maybe since COVID, with these entrepreneur ship through ownership programs, and you see all these young people taking these programs, and they get excited, and they all want the same type of businesses, and they're competing for the service companies with repetitive revenues, but they're also competing against private equity and everybody else who recognizes those opportunities as well. So we've seen quite a few people come in, on the buy side, really pushing for businesses that maybe they're not quite fully prepared to own or have any experience in, and they're competing against buyers that have, present holdings in those sectors, experience operating in those sectors, and obviously deep pockets. So I'm not trying to discourage the young entrepreneurs, but I'm just trying to let them know that, sometimes you can try to enter into something a little bit too early, and I'm seeing a lot of that, especially, businesses that require licensing. When you look at like HVAC, you look at pest control, you look at plumbing, you look at all those businesses, at least in Florida, require a license. And if you are planning on leveraging, to purchase one of those businesses, the SBA and their lenders are requiring those licenses to be in place to loan to you. So it's made, it's created a lot of interest in businesses, but it's creating a lot more churn and getting to the right buyers.
Understood. So what I'm hearing here is that even people who are acquiring businesses are still having a bit of trouble during that post-purchase integration process. And they might not be familiar with the niche or maybe the business that they're buying, so they might be coming into it a bit too early. Let's dig a little bit deeper there.
Yeah, I think, people look at skill sets, right? And they go, oh, well, I've got all this experience operating a business. But let's say you take a landscaping firm, right? And let's say this landscaping firm does design and build for high-end homeowners, right? So you're talking about $5 million to $50 million homes. Someone coming in off the street without landscaping design and build experience is not going to be able to operate that business successfully unless they bring someone with them with that design and build experience. So I think one of the things that, these young entrepreneurs need to think about is the specific skills of the businesses that they're chasing, the specific licensing requirements, of those businesses. And they need to find someone, before they start seeking those businesses to partner with, who will come in, and take care of the licensing for them and be able to, service the clientele of that exiting owner. Because in a lot of these types of businesses, that are being sold right now in these home services type businesses, a lot of these businesses, the seller wants to retire. They don't want to stick around for 5 years, to teach someone the business. Most of them want out in about within a year. So if you have that person, as part of your acquisition team, it's going to make your life a lot easier in the acquisition process.
Yeah. Yeah. And so are you guys mainly at Edison? Are you focused more on the sell side or the buy side of things?
Well, every transaction needs a buyer and a seller. So,
Right.
the way we look at it is our focus is on, getting sellers, right? So we market to sellers and our listings market to buyers. So, through the activity of listing businesses for sale, we get buyers. So it's both because you have to work with, both a buyer and a seller to get a transaction. But do we work with sellers individually on their searches? Okay, yes, we do. And I would say when the process for working with buyers is a little bit more difficult for us because a lot of them that come to us will say, "Hey, I don't really know what I want." They'll say, "Oh, it can be anywhere in the US." They just haven't pinpointed things down. But when we do find the occasional buyers that say, "Hey, I'm looking for an HVAC business because I've got the partner with the licensing in place. I've got, the experience in running these types of businesses, and I want that in, you know, Florida." That's an easier task for us to do. But when you get buyers that really don't know what they want, or they'll know it when they see it, it's kind of hard to help them.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. And so, as more so brokers, of course, you're always helping sellers to actually position their business to sell. When it comes to positioning a business to sell, a lot of times brokers are really working on like communicating the story of this business owner to potential buyers of like, hey, this is why this fits into your buy box. Now, how could sellers best like prepare themselves to kind of go through that process when it comes to curating their story for a buyer?
Are you talking about the seller preparing their story or the buyer preparing their story?
The seller, from a seller's perspective.
Yeah, the seller, I mean, from a seller's perspective, one of the things that we do and we spend, an extensive amount of time with on the seller is crafting that story. And it starts really for us with a seller questionnaire. We have I think it's about 138 question seller questionnaire, and we'll supplement that nowadays with AI. So we'll answer as much as possible, just through, using AI prompts, to fill out as much of that questionnaire as possible and then have the seller check it. And on the items where, you're not going to find public information and AI can't, pull those kind of things out of thin air, like employee information, et cetera, we'll have the seller, provide all that into our questionnaire. The other thing that we started doing probably about a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago, is we started doing personal interviews with the seller, just like you and I are doing right now. So we'll get the seller, on a Zoom, similar to a podcast, and we'll ask them a bunch of questions about, how they got started in the business, their history with the business, what they've done to grow the business, what they see as the opportunities for a new owner are. We'll ask them all those questions. So there's like a personal that personal story is being told actually by the person, in front of a camera. So, a prospective buyer can see and listen to that, before they even, we even have that first buyer seller meeting. It's been a great, great way to help sell a business. It's changed the game significantly.
Yeah, that's a fantastic approach. So you're getting the buyer to articulate their own story, through a Zoom call, and so they're able to communicate. Hey, look, this is how I'd explain the financials over time. If they had a dip, they're able to articulate that as if they were communicating directly to the buyer, and then you guys are more so just helping out with that transaction. Now, tell me a bit more about the percentage of people or people who are interested in selling their company that come to work with you guys, but they just aren't there yet. They're just not ready.
Yeah.
What are the things that they're lacking? Is it the financials that they're lacking mainly? Is it, the team is just too founder dependent? Tell me a bit more about those people.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to like pick a few things of why sellers don't actually list to sell the business when we first start talking to them, I mean, the first one is the number, right? It's, when you give them an opinion of value, and I always give an opinion of value on the business before I ever would take a listing. I don't want, there are other brokers, plenty of them out there who will just say, here, sign the listing agreement. We'll figure out what it's worth later, hoping that, somebody, the market will wear that seller down into the price that they want. But, in order to get there, it's a long drawn out process and you may never get there. And you will likely, you know, not sell a majority of the businesses, that are listed that way. But our approach is we're going to tell them what we think the business is worth, what it'll sell for on the marketplace. We'll do a detailed analysis, to figure that out. And then if there's a meeting of the minds on the value of the business, we'll list it. If there isn't, we won't. So that's the primary reason why most people won't sell. When we tell them their business is worth 2 million and they say, well, I need 3 million to retire, we'll start having a conversation about what kind of numbers it would take, to get to 3 million in value. If there's some ideas or things that we can, do along the way to help them to get to that 3 million, certainly we'll help them, but our focus is really selling the business. So, that's the primary reason. Second reason would be just that the financials are a mess. A lot of times we just see where, maybe the seller, they've got problems with their QuickBooks setup and, the information coming out is pretty spotty. It could be maybe they are just running massive amounts of money, personal expenses through their business. And, there's no real clear track record to, prove that to a buyer that these are personal expenses and not business expenses. Though that's probably the number two reason. And then probably the number three reason, that we get where people, just can't pull the trigger on selling is just kind of that emotional element. Where it finally hits them, it's like, okay, yeah, you're going to put my business up for sale. And then what am I going to do? And it just hits them that maybe they don't have the plan in place yet for that post ownership period of time. A lot of them will talk, oh, I want to see my grandkids more. Oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do that. I'm going to travel, and then when it comes time to actually, stepping away from their business, they're so emotionally involved and attached to it. It becomes very difficult for them and they just can't pull the trigger. But I'd say those are the three biggest reasons why people don't go forward with the listen.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense. So just to reiterate that back to you, Eric, one of the first reasons why you're having to tell people, wait, they're just not getting the dollar amount of which they actually want for their business, or they might have an idea, a number in their head in which they think that their business is worth, and then once you guys actually crunch down the numbers and get their true valuation on what buyers would actually value their company at, it doesn't necessarily align. Then secondly, your financials is just a mess. Books is all out of whack. Financials are all over the place. And no, that makes it lack transferability. Nobody's gonna buy business where the numbers are kind of all out of whack. It's really hard to have any sort of predictability in that type of set as well, because can't really distinguish what are expenses or what aren't, and what's true cash flow and what isn't. And then lastly, I'm hearing is that the founder is just still emotionally attached to their baby. They don't want to let go of their baby. They want to see it grow up. They want to see it go to college, and they're willing to hold on to it until the very last moment where they might lose all opportunities to never sell in the first place. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. See it all the time. It's kind of funny because there's a saying that's going around. If, a seller hits 70, he's never selling.
No, I would say that's true.
It it isn't 100% true because I did sell one last year and the owner was in his early 70s. So I was like,
Okay.
prove that one wrong. But that's the only time I've ever proved it wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes a lot of sense because once you, especially they've been doing maybe the last 40 years or so, of their life. It's at that point, it's just They probably are gonna keep that passed down your will or, whatever may have you. But okay. Okay, I love everything you kind of communicated with me today, Eric. I want to switch gears here because we ask every
Sure.
guest these same questions because we're building a data set on how high level operators and decision makers think when it comes to building companies. So I'm gonna run through these 5 questions pretty quickly, Eric, and then you're just gonna give me out like the first thing that comes to mind. You ready?
Okay.
Okay. So when you're making a high stakes decision, what's the first principle or framework that you rely on?
Honesty, I don't want to sugarcoat anything and I don't want to mislead anyone because I got to sleep at night. Right. So, it goes back to, we were talking just about, valuing a business. I'm not going to tell someone their business is going to sell for 3 million if I've seen enough evidence that it's going to sell for 2. I don't want to, sit there, the way I describe it and I tell sellers is this. I'd rather disappoint you today and excite you tomorrow than excite you today and disappoint you tomorrow. Cause I don't want to have that discussion, 6 months, a year down the road. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I only got you 2 million. I'd rather say, hey, I'm only going to get you probably 2 million right up front. And they're like, I really want 3 million. Well, I'd rather disappoint them right away.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Honesty is the best policy. So, what's the most common bottleneck that you see consistently that prevents owners from scaling effectively?
From scaling quickly themselves.
Or effectively, really. Not quickly, but effectively.
Yeah, usually themselves, right? Because a lot of them, and, I'll even include myself in this, you want to try to control and do everything to a specific standard. And, the best person to do that is you because you understand that standard better than anyone else. You push that standard, harder than anyone else. And when you realize that you're expecting other people to meet your standards, that's always a challenge. So what I've seen from the vast majority of sellers and even myself is, you get in the way of your own growth because you don't always trust other people, to kind of match your level of enthusiasm, interest, and detail.
Right, right. And sometimes they won't, right? Like, well, upon delegation, someone's just performing at maybe 60% of the level in which you are. It's better than you having your finger in everything that's going on in the business. And it's just about over time hiring better, getting that A+ talent where eventually your team's better than you ever could be, right? And that the team talent exponentially increases because if you're able to get 5 team members that are at least performing at 60% each, that's still better than your 100% of you,
Right.
right? Spread across 5 different parts of the business. So yeah, I completely agree there. The
Yeah.
next
And
question, go ahead.
hopefully everybody's, unique skill sets and perspectives and everything else are brought to the table and they help everyone else learn and grow, as well.
Right, right. And
As well as just the
personalities.
owner, right?
Yes, exactly. Completely agree. Now, this goes back into like the hiring question, right? So, when you're evaluating leaderships or teams, what's one signal that tells you someone's A+ talent?
That's a tough one because I've seen people, fool me and I've been, both ways. I guess the best way to determine if someone's A+ talent is they've done it before, right? And they can demonstrate that they've done something before and they can show that they did it at a high level. So many times you get people talking about what they did do or could do. Show me. I think I've come to the point now where it's, I don't want to hear what you did. I want to see what you did. Show me evidence.
Love it. I love it. Let the work talk for itself.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, this is a more fun one. I love this question because it's more of a visionary one, right? So, if you had to double the value of a business in the next 12 months, well, where would you focus first?
To double the value of it, to double the value of most businesses, you're going to have to grow it, because I got to believe most business owners, run their businesses fairly efficiently, so to double the size of something in that short a time, it's going to be based on new relationships. And those relationships need to be well crafted. Let's say you're manufacturing something, to double, first of all, you're going to need to double your demand or increase your demand. So you're going to have relationships with some form of customer base, right? Once you get the orders, the next thing you're going to need to do is produce them. So how do you produce them? You're going to need to either labor inside in-house. So you're going to have relationships with people that can bring you that labor, or you're going to have to subcontract it. So you're going to have relationships with people that you can subcontract it. And then obviously there's the control element of it too, because when you start to grow that quickly, you're managing a different animal.
Mhm.
So, gosh, the one thing there is I would say you need some, if you're not very, very well versed in financial management, probably a fractional CFO or something to that effect would be very helpful in your growth stage to just make sure that you're not burning the cash faster than you're making it.
Yeah, understood. Okay, I could agree. I could agree on certain aspects of that as well. And a lot of times when people think about doubling revenue or doubling the business, it's like how can you increase the LTV of a customer? That's like one of the things I like to focus on first is like how can we make this same customer stay with us a bit longer or come back and be a repeat customer? So now we're getting more from the same customer without having to think about more customer acquisition costs. And then how can we maybe affect our bottom line? Is there any way that we can decrease the amount we're spending? Because that can also help us double the value of a company because we're just increasing our profitability without having to necessarily worry about revenue and things of that nature as well. So, but I definitely love your approach there too. I really think it's always a balancing act. Business is a balancing act of all these things at one time. So it's so fun.
Yeah, I mean, doubling the value of a company in 12 months is a tremendous challenge, no matter
Yeah.
what approach you take.
It
Yeah.
is. It is. Okay. So, last question for you here. So, what's a mistake that you see business owners repeat over and over again that costs them the most?
The one thing I see the most is, we'll go back to the books and I'll give an example. It was a gentleman who had it was an HVAC company. And, the mistake that he made is he ran a lot of stuff through his business and he couldn't dig it out to prove that, it was all personal. And he asked me to do a valuation on his business. And I told him the number and he's like, well, this business should be worth, way more than this. It should be worth this. And I'm like, well, tell me why. And he's like, well, I've got all these costs, buried in here. Here's these, two trucks. And it's like, well, the trucks are owned by the corporation. How can you separate that out? If you're not using them for the corporation, if you're spending the money there, and how are you going to prove to a buyer that those trucks aren't on the road, servicing, your customer base? We went through like about a dozen scenarios of, stuff that he was running through his business that you could never be able to prove that those were actual legitimate personal expenses, and we did the math. For every dollar he saved in taxes, he lost $37 in value.
Wow. For every $1 he saved in taxes, he lost $37 in value.
Yeah. So he's like, well, what do I do? And I said, well, you need to put 2 good years on the books at least, running this business clean. So I know he's probably about a year and a half into that process, or getting close to a year and a half into that process. So,
Yeah.
a business that he probably would have easily sold very quickly, for the price he wanted. If he had clean books, he would have, he'd be sold by now.
That's a great lesson to kind of wrap this podcast up with here, Eric. I've enjoyed our conversation today. I mean, you spoke a bit about how, some businesses just don't get across that selling table and the reasons why, right? And
Yeah.
also what it truly looks like to build a business that gets across that selling table well, or that closing table. Eric, where exactly could they find you? What's, your website, your LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Yeah, the website is, www Edison, Edison, B for business, A for advisors.com. And you can always call me. I'll give out my cell phone number. Everybody seems to, ring it up all the time anyway. So 239-738-6227.
All right, Eric. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Make sure you guys check them out. Make sure you check out Ready AI. We'll see you guys on the next episode.